What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video today, we're going to take a quick look at AWS Lambda functions and how to use them in Python. Similarly to my S3 tutorial, this is not going to be a full crash course. It's not going to be a full comprehensive guide. It's going to just be a quick introduction. So I want to show you what AWS Lambda functions are about, how you can easily set them up, and we're only going to cover the basics. My goal is to keep things as simple and as straight to the point as possible. The goal is to teach you AWS Lambda functions in about 30 minutes, maybe less, so that you can get started right away and then go into more detail and more documentation if you want to. If you like my content and want to support the channel, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. But now let us get right into it. Alright, so we're going to learn about AWS Lambda and Lambda functions in this video today, and as I already mentioned in the introduction, this is not going to be a full detailed crash course. The goal of this video is to be a jump starting point for those of you who don't know anything about AWS Lambda, or maybe not even about AWS in general, because I feel like these AWS services are oftentimes documented in a very verbose way. So it's oftentimes quite confusing to do even basic stuff. So for example, in the case of S3, you want to create a bucket and upload a file. That can be already quite complicated if you have to do it with the documentation, even though it's actually quite simple if you have a quick starting point in the form of a 30-minute tutorial, which I recently produced. And today I want to do the same thing for AWS Lambda. So we're going to talk about this service today. And as I said, the goal is to get you started quickly, to get you some results quickly, and then you can go and study the documentation or watch some more advanced comprehensive courses if you want to afterwards to build on top of that. But I feel like it's always a good way to start learning something if you can get results quickly. So I want to show you how you can use AWS Lambda immediately without having to do any fancy documentation reading, just getting started quickly. And for that, I want to briefly cover what AWS Lambda is. For this, we are here at aws.amazon.com/lambda. And essentially, in a nutshell, this is a service for serverless computation, which means there is no server. We don't need to maintain any server. We don't need to manage any server. We don't need to care about DevOps stuff when it comes to scaling and so on. All we have to do is we have to define functions. They take some input, they output something, and that's it. Everything else is managed by Amazon. So if you scroll down here, you can see the benefits of Lambda are no need for managing servers, automatic scaling. This is also very useful because it doesn't matter if you have one customer or one user, or if you have 1,000 users, because AWS does the scaling for you. You just have to call the function more often, and you don't have to care about anything like server infrastructure. You just have to say, I have money, call this function more often, and you pay as you go. That's the third point here. You don't have to pay on an ongoing basis, even if no one is using your functions. You just have to pay based on the usage, and it's also optimized for performance. Down below, you can also see some use cases. Data processing, also data pre-processing for machine learning are use cases here. Also, web and mobile backends. In general, everything that's event-driven, everything that's scheduled, everything that is not a continuously running process, everything that has to happen once in a while, maybe 4 times a day, maybe 1 time per week or something, where you just call a function to do something and that's it, then you don't need the server anymore. That's the perfect use case for AWS Lambda. You can read into more if you want to, but what I want to do now is get right into it. We're going to sign into the console. Now, what you're going to need here is an AWS account. I trust you to be able to set this up on your own, so I'm not going to cover that. You just need to create an account and also add a payment method. Besides that, you can just follow this tutorial, and I'm going to explain everything for you, but that is quite simple. I think you're going to be able to do that. So what you want to do here in the console is you want to go to the search bar and you want to type Lambda. So this is going to get you to the Lambda service. And here now, what we can do is we can create a function. So we can get started right away by creating a function. And all we need to do here is we need to say we want to do it from scratch. We're going to provide a function name. Now, let's, for the first example here, use a basic function that just takes a string and reverses it. So I'm going to call this string-reversal. And then we can choose the programming language that we want to use. So you can go with Java, .NET, you can go with Node. I'm going to obviously go with Python here. We're going to leave the default architecture. We're not going to change anything here. And then we're just going to click on create function, which is hidden by my camera. But there's a button, an orange button here, create function. We click on that. And this is going to create our first Lambda function. Now, you can see already this is quite straightforward. Just create a function and choose a language. And now here we immediately get a coding editor. This is basically VS Code here in the browser. And we can define our Lambda handler. Now, for those of you who enjoy Vim bindings, like me, you can go here to extensions and you can enable the Vim extension. Then you have Vim bindings here in the editor, and you don't have to use arrow keys, or you don't have to use the mouse or anything like that if you don't want to. But basically, we have this Lambda handler here, and this defines what happens when our function is being called. So this right here is a simple hello world from Lambda function. We can deploy it, and then we can go to test and see what happens when we send something to that function, when we call that function and send a request to it. For this, we can create a test event. I'm going to show you also in a second how to do that in Python. But the test event here is for testing in the browser. If you don't want to write any code yet, you can just go and say create new event. We can then call this my test event, whatever. And we can say it's private, and then whatever you want to pass here, you provide as a JSON object. In this case, it doesn't really matter because our function does not care about the request. So I can just go ahead and say save, I can say test, and then here in the details, I'm going to see that the function returned hello world or hello from Lambda. Now I can go to the code, I can change that. For example, I can say, don't say hello from Lambda, say hello world. Then I can just say deploy. This is going to update my function, and then I can go to test again, run this again. Actually, edit saved event. There you go, test. And this is now going to return something else. If I go to details, it says hello world, not hello from Lambda. So that is the most basic example we can have. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle the payload. So we're going to take stuff from the payload and react to it. For example, I'm going to say that the name is going to be equal to event and then name. So that is going to take from the event that is passed to this function from the payload, it's going to take the field name and it's going to store it in a variable. And now what I can do is I can say here, I want to use a formatted string, and instead of saying hello world, I want to say hello name. Quite simple. Deploy this again, go to test. And here now I'm going to edit my event by removing these three key value pairs. And I'm going to say name is going to be equal to neural9, for example. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to test that. And when I look at the output, you can see hello neural9. So that worked. This is how we can take stuff from the payload and incorporate it into our function here. Now, let's do what we actually wanted to do. We wanted to reverse a string. So what we're going to do is we're going to say string is equal to event and then string. And then I'm going to say reversed string is going to be equal to string and then just colon -1. This is just a reversing of the string. I think most efficient way to do it in Python, also computationally. But what we're going to return now is we're going to return a dictionary. So I'm going to say dump s. I'm going to use curly brackets to make a dictionary. And then I'm going to say original colon is going to be equal to string. And then reverse is going to be reverse string. Quite simple. Save that, deploy that, and then go to test. And here now we're going to say string. Let's still use neural9. Save, test. And now you can see original neural9 reversed, neural9 reversed. So that is how we can write a simple Lambda function. Now the question is, how can I actually use this now? Let's say this is some useful component of my application. I want to outsource this functionality to AWS Lambda. I don't want to do it on my own server. I want to have a Lambda function for this. Now I created this function. How can I use it in my application? For this, we're going to use the Python package called Bodo3. This is the package that allows us to interact with AWS. But before that, we need to actually set up AWS on our system. So the AWS authentication and everything. And for that, we're going to use the AWS CLI. Now, this requires a couple of additional steps. First of all, we need to go to our console, we need to go to our account, we need to go to security credentials, and we need to create an access key. So what you want to do here is you want to click on create access key down here, and you're going to get an access key ID and an access key secret, which you have to then use in the CLI. So you want to go to the AWS CLI, you want to click here on get started. You're going to find the links in the description down below. You want to click here on installing or updating to the latest version of the AWS CLI. You want to go down here to your operating system, in my case Linux, and you want to run the command that is the correct one to install it on your system. In my case, it was this here. So 3 commands here to install the AWS CLI. So depending on your operating system, this is going to be different. On Windows, you have a different command. On Mac, you have a different command. And what you want to do is you want to follow the instructions, and then you want to be able to run AWS as a command in your command line. So in my case here, I'm going to navigate to my current directory. And what you want to run, this is the important part right now, you want to run AWS configure. So AWS configure is going to ask you for the access key ID and the access key secret. So when I run this here, you're going to see it asks me for the ID. I already have one, so I can just press enter and keep the one I have. Then also the secret key, have one, so I can keep it. And then it asks for a region name. Now the region name, it makes sense to have it set to the same thing that you have up here in the browser. In my case here, Europe, Frankfurt, which is EU Central 1. So I also have EU Central 1 here. And then that configuration is now stored in your environment. So you can use that automatically in Python by using the boto3 package. So you want to just do pip or pip3 install boto3, and then in square brackets, you want to say CRT to be able to use that configuration here. So pip3 install boto3 CRT, and that is going to allow you to easily, without having to pass any keys around, just use your account in Python. So we're going to create a new file, main.py, and all we need to do here is we need to say import JSON, import boto3, this is the Amazon package, and we can just create a client by saying boto3.client, and then we provide the service. In our case here, this is Lambda. So this is going to give us a client that can run Lambda functions, or it's called invoke Lambda functions. So how can we call this function now? How can we reverse a string? Very simply by saying response is equal to client invoke. And here all I have to do is I have to pass a function name. The function name in this case is string-reversal. String-reversal. Of course, this name is not globally unique. It's unique to my account. So if I say string reversal, there's only one string reversal in my particular account. So it's going to use that. And then I also want to pass a payload. The payload is going to be a dictionary, actually as a string. So like this. And we're going to say string, and then I'm going to say neural 9. That is going to give me a response. And then I can just print response payload. This is going to give me a stream, so I have to read from it, and that is going to give me my output. So I can just run this now, and you're going to see I get here status code 200, neural 9, reversed, the reversed neural 9. And I can also do that with other text. So I can say, for example, tutorial AWS. I can run this, and I get this reversed as well. So this is how I would call the Lambda function, for example, in a Flask, Django, Fast API application. I would just have a client, and I would invoke that function through the command line. So quite simple. Let us go ahead now and define a second function. For that, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to say create function. Now let's call this a simple calculator. Go to the runtime, Python 3.13, create a function. And then we have the same editor again. So I'm going to go ahead now and say I want to do a calculation. I want to take number 1, number 2, and an operation, and then I want to return the result. So how would I do that? Same way as before. Number 1 is equal to event, and then number 1. Then I would say number 2 is equal to event number 2. Operator or operation is equal to event operation. And then I would say if number 1 is none, or number 2 is none, or operation is none, then return a status code 400 for an invalid request. Then we're going to say otherwise, we're going to try to get these to floats, and then we're going to say if the operator, or actually we can use match case. So match operation, add, subtract, multiply, divide. So it actually wrote all the code for me. Yeah, you have AI autocompletion here. But actually, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to say I have 4 operations here. I have 2 numbers. And then if I have division, I have to check that the second number is not equal to 0. I erase the respective errors here, or return the respective error codes here. But besides that, in the end, what I do, this is not done yet. I have to say return, and then just status code 200, result is result. That's it. So this is our calculation endpoint now, or calculation function now. So again, I just deploy. I don't even have to test it here. So I'm going to just go back to my current directory. I'm going to open my Python file. I'm going to invoke now the function simple calculator. And I'm going to pass here number 1, which is going to be equal to 10. And then number 2, which is going to be equal to 5, and then the operation, which is going to be equal to multiply. So I'm going to run that, and I'm going to hopefully get the result. No, I don't get the result. Why is that? Seems like we have a syntax error. Let me just double check this. Oh yeah, of course, we don't have an except block. Not sure if that's the problem, but we need to also say except value error. Besides that, I think should work. Let's see. There you go. Result 50. Perfect. Now, these are all quite simple. The cool thing about Lambda functions is we can connect them with other AWS services. So, for example, in my video about S3, for those of you who've watched it, we learned how to create simple buckets, how to upload stuff. We can also do the same thing here in a Lambda function. We don't need to authenticate ourselves because we're already in the correct account. But basically, I can just say here as well, import Bodo3, and I can do the whole process of uploading a file to a bucket. Now, for this, it makes sense to create a bucket. So I'm going to go to S3 for a second. This is now only interesting to you if you care about S3. But I can go here now. I can create a bucket. I can say my Lambda fancy bucket or something like that. Let's copy that. I can leave the default options. I can create a bucket. And now I can upload files to this bucket when the function is being called. So I can go to my handler here. Actually, let's go and create a new function. Let's create a function called, I don't know, S3 Lambda integration. Let's choose Python. Let's leave everything at default. And what I can do now is I can just basically say that I want to create an S3 client and I want to upload a file to the bucket. So I can say here, import Bodo3. Then I can say S3 client is equal to Bodo3 client S3. I also want to pass the region name. So I want to say region name is equal to, in my case, EU Central 1. And then here now what we want to do is we want to get the file content from the event. So this is going to be a base64 encoded string. So we're going to say file underscore name is equal to event file name, and then file content is equal to event file content. Now, if not file name or not file content, we're going to return 400 again. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to try to decode the string. So we're going to say here try, and I'm going to say file content is equal to base. Actually, we need to import that. I need to say import base64. So now I'm going to say base64.b64 decode file content, and then I'm going to say S3 client. Put object, it already suggests what I want to do here. Bucket key body. So the key is obviously going to be file name, body is going to be file content, and the bucket name is, what did we have? We had my Lambda fancy bucket. So, okay, copy paste doesn't work here. So let's go my Lambda fancy bucket. And that should upload the file to my bucket, and then I just want to return success. And otherwise here, if I have some exception, if something doesn't work, I'm going to just return 500. Quite simple. So this is going to allow us to upload files, and it's going to interact with S3, but you're going to see that there's a problem with that. I can actually try to run this, and you're going to see this is not going to work. But let's pretend that it should work, and let's write our corresponding Python script here. What should we do here? Quite simple. We just have to create a file. So I'm gonna create a new file here. Let's call it example.txt. And here I'm gonna just say hello world. I am using Lambda with S3. I can close this now. And what I want to do here is I want to say with open example.txt in reading byte mode, because it could be also something else, as file. What I want to do is I want to say file content is equal to base. Now we need to import this as well here. Import base 64. This time we're not going to decode, but to encode. So we're going to say base 64, B64 encode. And we want to encode the file content, or actually file.read is the file content. So file.read, we're going to encode that, and we want to decode that to UTF-8. That is the file content, and then we can just say payload is equal to the following. The file underscore name is going to be equal to whatever we want to call this file in the bucket. So this can be a different name, for example, uploaded example.txt. And then file content is going to be obviously the file content. And then here we're going to now invoke the function, what did we call it? S3 Lambda integration, S3 Lambda integration, and the payload is going to be equal to JSON dump S payload. All right, that should be it. Let's run this and let's see what we get here. You can see access denied because it's not authorized to put object as on S3. We don't have the permissions. So this is already something that would lead you into the documentation and drive you nuts, because you basically have to now figure out how to work with roles. And if you do this for the first time, maybe you're confused, but actually it's quite simple. You just have to go to the IAM service, so to this service here, and you basically just have to go to roles. You have to create a new role for a particular AWS service. Here we choose the Lambda service, and we go to next. And here now we have to search for the S3 full access permission policy. So this one here, I can just select this. I can go to next, and then I have to provide a role name. Let's call this Lambda S3 permission role, whatever, and just create the role. And now all I have to do is I have to go to my service here. I have to go to configuration. I have to go to permissions, and I have to edit the execution role. So I have to edit this here, and I want to go to existing role down here and select the Lambda S3 permission role, save it. And now this function here has additional permissions. So now I can go back to my code. Actually, it seems to be lagging a bit. There you go. So run this, and now we're going to see file uploaded successfully. So my code now should have uploaded this example.txt file. So let's see if that's actually what happened. Let's go to S3. Let's go to my bucket and see if that happened. Click on it, and we can see we have the uploaded example txt. So this is also something you can do with Lambda, and you can do much more things. You have to think about the fact that most big corporations are using very complex Lambda functions, many of them interacting with one another. So you can learn a lot about this. This is really just scratching the very, very surface of this, but I wanted to show you how you can do that easily in Python, how you can easily work with Lambda functions, and that's how you do it. You create functions, you call them, you have to authenticate yourself with the AWS CLI by just using your key and by just using AWS configure and everything. But then you can just go ahead and connect the two services that we already covered on this channel, AWS S3 and AWS Lambda. And yeah, that's a good starting point. Now you can go into more details. So that's it for this video today. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something. Let me know in the comment section down below if you like these tutorials on AWS services. Let me also know if you want me to cover specific services that you're interested in. So besides S3 and Lambda, which services would you also want me to cover briefly in about 30 minutes? And besides that, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching, see you in the next video, and bye.